He came back. That is the part of the story most people do not know, the part that makes everything else harder to hold. He came back after years of silence, after a prison sentence that took him away, and a shame that kept him gone. After decades of distance that had calcified into something neither of them knew how to name. He came back an old man, 67 years old, walking with a slight limp from an injury that had never healed right, carrying nothing but the particular courage it takes to knock on a door you once walked away from. Shaquille O'Neal let him in. That decision, to let a man back in who had not earned the right to be let back in, is the kind of decision that does not make headlines. It happens quietly, in a living room, with two people and no cameras and no applause. It is the hardest kind of generosity there is. And then one Tuesday morning, that same man, Joe Tony, 67 years old, who had spent the last 4 years trying to deserve the second chance his son had given him, walked into a Bentley dealership in Houston, and a salesman named Craig looked at his age, looked at his clothes, looked at the slight unsteadiness of his walk, and decided, without a single question, that this man was not a buyer. What Craig did not know would take him a long time to forget. What Shaquille O'Neal did next was not loud. It was not loud at all. But it moved through this country like a current because it was about something older and harder and more universal than a car dealership on a Tuesday morning. It was about what it means to forgive someone and what it means to protect someone you have already paid the highest price to love. The showroom floor was the color of money, polished concrete, pale gray, stretched from the entrance to the far wall where 4 vehicles sat under individual spotlights as though they were paintings in a museum. A Continental GT in midnight blue, a Flying Spur in silver, a Bentayga in deep forest green, and near the center of the room, on a rotating platform, a Mulliner Bacalar in a color that did not have a common name, a shade somewhere between champagne and copper that the brochure called julep. The air was cool and faintly cedar-scented. Piano music moved through invisible speakers. The floor staff wore dark blazers with small silver pins on the lapels. His name tag said Craig. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, with the practiced ease of someone who has sold expensive things for a long time and knows, or believes he knows, who is in a room to buy and who is in a room to look. Joe Tony came through the front door at 10:22 a.m. He was 67 years old. He wore khaki trousers, pressed, a blue button-down shirt, clean and tucked, brown leather shoes, polished but worn at the heel. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg, the result of an injury from his time incarcerated that had fused wrong and never been properly corrected. His hair was gray and close-cropped. His hands were large, the hands of a man who had done physical work most of his life. He stopped just inside the entrance and looked at the room. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has wanted to see for a long time and is now allowing himself to take in slowly. He had come for a specific reason. His son had mentioned in passing 2 weeks ago that he had been thinking about getting something new for when he visited Houston. Something he could drive himself for once, he'd said, without anyone driving him anywhere. Joe had listened carefully, the way he listened to everything his son said now, with the attention of a man who knows he is running low on time to earn things back. He had made a note. He had come in to ask some questions, to look at some options, to maybe help narrow it down. He had wanted to do something useful. Craig appeared at his side in under a minute. "Afternoon," Craig said. "Not welcome, not good morning. Just the word, delivered the way you deliver a word when you've already decided the conversation will be brief." "Good morning," Joe said. He smiled. He had a good smile, unhurried and open. Beautiful showroom. Thank you, Craig said. Are you meeting someone here? Joe looked at him. No, he said. I came to look at the flying spur. And maybe the Bentayga. I'm trying to help my son choose something. Craig's eyes moved to the worn heels of Joe's shoes, to the slight unevenness of his walk, to the absence of a watch on his wrist. Of course, Craig said. Our flying spur starts at around 214. The Bentayga is 230 to 260 depending on specification. I'm aware of the range, Joe said. Of course. The pause that followed was one of those pauses that is not really a pause. It is a decision, wearing the clothes of a pause. You know, we do have a couple of appointments coming in shortly, and our floor team will need to be focused. I wouldn't want you to feel like you weren't getting proper attention. He gestured toward the door with a kind of professional smoothness that had clearly been practiced. Perhaps if your son wanted to come by himself or give us a call to set up a time, we could make sure he gets the full experience. Joe was still. He had learned stillness in prison. Not the defeated kind, the kind that comes when you have lived through things that cannot be undone, and have decided that the only direction left is forward. He nodded once. Just once. I appreciate your time, he said. He walked back out through the glass doors into the Houston morning. He sat in his car, a 2019 Camry, silver, with 94,000 miles on it, for a few minutes. He did not call Shaq. He had made a promise to himself 4 years ago, when his son had opened that door and let him back in. He would not be a problem. He would not be something Shaq had to manage, or fix, or clean up after. He had been that for too many years already. He would be something else now. Something better. He would earn the second chance one quiet day at a time. He started the car and drove home. He did not tell anyone. He told Shaq's sister by accident, 3 days later, on the phone, when she asked how he was doing, and he said fine, and she asked again the way women who have learned to listen for what is not being said ask again. And the whole thing came out. She called Marcus before she hung up. Shaquille O'Neal was in Miami when he found out. He was sitting on a terrace, early evening, water going orange in the distance, when Marcus called. He listened without speaking. When Marcus finished, he said, "How long ago did this happen?" 3 days. He didn't tell me. No, Shaq looked at the water. He thought about his father. He thought about the version of this story that people did not know, the version that did not fit neatly into the story of Shaquille O'Neal, self-made, raised by a single mother who worked double shifts and never quit. Both things were true. The mother who raised him alone, who was the bedrock of everything he had ever built. And also this, the man who had come back, the man who was 67 and walking with a limp and had spent 4 years trying to be something better than what he had been. People did not find it easy to hold both of those things at the same time. Shaq had spent years learning how. He thought about Joe sitting in the Camry with 94,000 miles on it, outside a Bentley dealership, having just been walked back to the door by a man in a dark blazer who had looked at his shoes and decided he didn't belong there. He thought about what it had cost his father to go in there in the first place. The quiet, specific courage of a 67-year-old man trying to do something useful for a son he had failed. Walking into a room full of expensive things to try to help make a choice, and being sent out. He sat for a long time. Then he called his father. Joe picked up on the second ring. "I heard," Shaq said. A pause, long enough to contain several things. "Your sister talks too much," Joe said. "She does," Shaq said. "Always has." Silence. "It was nothing," Joe said. It wasn't Pop. He had started calling him that 18 months ago. It had taken 2.5 years to get there. "I need you to let me handle something." A longer pause. "Shaq, you came back," Shaq said. "You showed up. You are trying every single day, and you went in there to do something for me." He stopped, started again. "Nobody gets to make you feel like you don't belong somewhere. Nobody. Not now." Joe was quiet on the other end. "Don't make a scene," he said finally. His voice was rough in the way of men who are not used to being taken care of and don't know how to accept it without pushing back slightly. "I won't make a scene," Shaq said. "Don't embarrass the man. I'm not going to embarrass anyone. A beat. I'm just going to buy a car." He drove to the dealership on a Thursday morning. No advance call. No entourage. No publicist. Just Shaq, Marcus, and a manila folder that Marcus was carrying and that Shaq had not explained the contents of since Tuesday. They walked in at 10:47 a.m. The showroom went quiet in the particular way it always goes quiet. That ripple of recognition moving from person to person in the room. The recalibration of every person present. The understanding that the next hour was going to be different from what anyone had planned. Craig was at a desk near the back. He stood up. He came across the floor quickly, his face arranged into the warmest version of itself. "Mr. O'Neill," he said. He was already extending his hand. "What a pleasure." "Welcome. We had no idea you were, I know," Shaq said. He shook the hand once. "I didn't call ahead." He looked around the room. He looked at the flying spur. He looked at the Bentayga. He looked at the Mulliner on the platform in the middle. Then he looked at Craig. "On Tuesday morning," he said, "a man came in here. 67 years old, khaki trousers, blue shirt, brown shoes. He walked with a slight limp in his left leg. He told you he was trying to help his son choose a car. He told you he wanted to look at the flying spur and the Bentayga." Craig's expression had not broken, but something behind it had shifted. "You told him you had appointments coming in and that your staff needed to be available. You suggested he come back with his son, or have his son call." Shaq let that sit. "You walked him out the door." "Mr. O'Neill. His name is Joe Toney," Shaq said. "He is my father." The showroom was completely still. Shaq walked to the flying spur. He walked around it slowly, the way his father had not been given the time to do. He looked at the interior through the window. He stood back and looked at the proportions. Then he walked to the Bentayga. Then he walked to the Mulliner on the platform. He stood in front of it for a long moment. Then he turned to Craig. "I'll take this one," he said. "And I want the flying spur." "The silver one." Craig blinked. "Both?" "My father is going to need something to drive," Shaq said. Marcus stepped forward with the folder. He opened it and laid 2 documents on the nearest desk. Shaq signed both without sitting down, standing at his full height, pen moving across the paper in the easy way of someone who is not the least bit uncertain about what he is doing. The total between the 2 vehicles was $812,000. He paid with a wire transfer that was completed before he left the building. Then he asked Marcus to wait by the door. He walked back to Craig. Craig was standing very straight. His face was professional. His hands, at his sides, were not entirely still. Shaq stopped in front of him. He was 1.5 feet taller. He did not use that. He did not lean forward. He spoke quietly, not a whisper, but close. "My father was not always a good man. He made mistakes that cost me and my family more than I'm going to tell you. And 4 years ago he came back and he asked for a chance to be better, and I gave it to him. That is the hardest thing I have ever done. Harder than anything that happened on a basketball court. Harder than anything in my career." He looked at Craig steadily. "He came in here on Tuesday to do something for me. Not for himself. For me." That was him trying. That was him using what little time we have left to be useful to his son. And you looked at his shoes and his limp, and you walked him out the door before he could say a second sentence. He reached into his jacket pocket. He put something on the desk between them. It was a photograph. Small, wallet-sized, the kind carried for years. It showed a man, young, maybe 25, holding a baby. The man was grinning, ear to ear, with the uncomplicated joy of a person who does not yet know all the ways he will fail. The baby was enormous even then. That was taken in 1972. He was 25. I was a few weeks old. Whatever happened after that, and a lot happened after that, this is also part of the story. This is also who he is. Craig looked at the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. "I'm not angry at you," Shaq said. "I want you to be better. The next time an old man with worn-down shoes walks in here and says he's trying to help his son, I need you to understand something. You don't know what it cost him to walk through that door. You don't know what he had to become to be able to stand there and try. Treat him like it cost him everything. Because it might have." He picked up the photograph. He put it back in his pocket. He picked up his copies of the paperwork. He walked to the door, where Marcus was waiting. He didn't look back. The Mulliner was delivered to Shaq's Houston property on Saturday morning. The Flying Spur was delivered to Joe Tony's house. Joe was standing on his front porch when the transport arrived. He watched the car come off the trailer. He stood on that porch for a while after the driver left without saying anything to anyone. His neighbor, a retired postal worker named Gerald, who had lived next door for 11 years, watched from his driveway and later said that Joe Tony stood on that porch for almost 6 minutes looking at that car before he went inside. He called Shaq from his kitchen. "This is too much," he said. "It's a car, Pop. Shaq, you needed something reliable." A long silence. "I don't know how to." Joe stopped. Started again. He had never been good with certain words. Neither had his son. It was one of the things they had discovered they had in common. In the 4 years of slow and careful rebuilding, both of them were better at doing than saying. "Thank you," he said. 2 words, flat on the surface, but carrying the weight of everything that had brought them here. "Come to Miami next month," Shaq said. "Drive down." Joe laughed. It was a surprised laugh, the kind that comes when something catches you off guard and you're too tired to hold it in. "That's a long drive," he said. "You've got a good car now," Shaq said. Craig left the dealership 2 weeks later. Not fired. He resigned. He wrote a letter to his manager that was short and direct. He said he had been in the business for 19 years and had spent 19 years sorting people by the wrong things, and he needed to go do something else for a while. He didn't elaborate. He spent 2 months volunteering at a workforce reentry program in Houston, a nonprofit that helped formerly incarcerated men find employment and rebuild their lives after release. He had found it by searching online the night after Shaq left the dealership. He had stayed on their website for a long time, reading the testimonials. He had thought about an old man in a blue button-down shirt, shoes polished but worn at the heel, a slight limp in his left leg, who had walked into his showroom trying to do something good for his son. He had thought about what it must have cost him. He started volunteering the following Monday. 6 months later, he was on their staff full-time. He called the organization's director on his first official day and said he wasn't sure he was qualified. The director, a woman named Patricia who had run the program for 14 years, said, "You don't have to be qualified. You have to show up. The men who come through here have been let down by people who didn't show up. Be a person who shows up." He wrote those words on an index card and taped it to his desk. He showed up every day. Joe Tony drove to Miami the following month. It took him 2 days. He stopped in Tallahassee the first night, at a Holiday Inn off the interstate, and ate dinner alone in the hotel restaurant and ordered a piece of pie for dessert because he could. Because there was no reason not to. Because he was 67 years old and driving a Bentley Flying Spur to see his son, and there was pie on the menu. He pulled into Shaq's driveway on a Saturday afternoon in early December. Shaq came out to meet him. They stood by the car for a moment. The big man and his father, 2 men between whom so much had happened that there was no longer a simple way to account for it. Only the slow accumulation of new days that were different from the old ones. Joe put his hand on the hood of the car. "Drive smooth," he said. "Good," Shaq said. They went inside. They had dinner. They watched a game. Joe fell asleep in the chair in the living room around 9:30, and Shaq turned the volume down on the television and let him sleep. He sat in the other chair and looked at his father sleeping and thought about the photograph in his pocket. The one of the young man holding an enormous baby, grinning with the uncomplicated joy of someone who did not yet know all the ways he would fail. He thought about how long it takes to become someone you can be proud of. He thought that 67 was not too old. He turned back to the game. He let his father sleep. "Now I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If this story moved you, even just a little, hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it helps more people find stories like this one. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and tap that bell so you never miss another video. But here's the most important thing I'll ask you today. Share this video. Send it to your mom. Send it to someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to become someone worth protecting. Because kindness is free and sharing it costs nothing. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.